things would fly in and eat up all the crumbs and lick the plates, and so they didn't have to wash the dishes. And everybody thought that, some people may have thought they were butterflies or flies or mosquitoes or whatever, but really they were fairies. People didn't talk about it. They just always left a little bit of something on their plate. Now, there was a young man by the name of Jack, and he was a handsome young man. He was a large young man. He was a hard-working young man, which was hard to find in that village. And all of the girls set their cap for him. And he built his little cabin nice and tight. He had a good place right there at the edge of the forest where he liked to work. And he disappeared for a while, and when he came back, he brought with him a young woman by the name of Janet, and they had been married. And all of the women were disappointed. But Janet was a better cook than all of the cooks put together, but her specialty was baking. She could bake a cake that would have every mouth in the village watering by noontime. All of the kids in the village would turn up and just sniff, and they would get fat just smelling her cake. And even when the priest came and he was having tea with her, instead of leaving crumbs, he would do his thumb like that and get every crumb up. Nobody left a bite, and all of them were talking about it. And so the king of the fairies got to hearing about Janet and her good cooking, and when he flew into her house, there wasn't a crumb anywhere. Not a crumb to be had. And he was just furious about it, because after all, he was the king of the fairies, and anybody with any sense had left him crumbs for years. And so he decided that he would capture her, take her under the hill, and make her his cook. Well, now Janet was a pretty smart young woman, and when the lord of the place asked her to come and bake a birthday cake for his son, and said that he would give her 2 gold coins, well, she said, okay, I'd be glad to do that. And she asked her husband, she said, now we could really use those 2 gold coins. And what do you think? Can you take care of the baby? And he said, well, I don't know. I've never taken care of a baby. This was a long time ago when men didn't take care of babies very often. And so she said, well, it's real simple. All you do is you feed him porridge. You put the porridge in his mouth and he'll swallow it. And then after a while you check his bottom and make sure that he's not wet or dirty. And that's all there is to it. And he said, well, I'll stay at home today, and you go up the hill and bake the cake, and we'll get the 2 gold coins, and I'll tend to the baby. Well, I don't know if y'all know much about babies, but when you put stuff in their mouth that they're not real fond of, they just spit it out. And this baby didn't like porridge. Especially didn't like his daddy feed him porridge. And so Jack was sticking porridge in the baby's mouth, and the baby was spitting it right back in his face. And he said, how does she manage this? All day long I work out in the woods and nobody spits in my face, and this baby's spitting in my face, and she says it's not on purpose. That's why I can't hit him. So he's shoveling, she left a big pot of porridge, and he was going to feed that baby that porridge. And so, in his face, in his beard, it was a mess. So off Janet goes. She bakes the cake, and she's on her way home, and she's walking along on this green grassy hill, when all of a sudden she slips down inside the hill. The king of the fairies had made a hole open, and there she is, and she's looking around inside the hill, and she knows just like that she's done for if she didn't figure out something, because people have been known to go under the hill and think they've spent the day, and when they come back, their children are all old and dead, and their great-grandchildren don't even recognize them. And she doesn't want to spend her life down underneath the hill, but she looks at the king of the fairies and she says, "To what do I owe this honor?" And he said, "You're going to cook for me. So you cooked for everybody else, and you're cooking for me." And she straightens herself up, stands up just as tall as she can, and she says, "I'm going to be the cook to the king of the fairies. Oh, you couldn't have made me happier, sir. I'm so thrilled, sir. How can I get started?" He says, "I want you to bake me a cake, a chocolate cake. I want you to make it just like the one I smelled the other day." And she said, "I'd be glad to." She said, "Take me to your kitchen." Well, all of the fairies looked around and they started talking to each other, and one of them said, "I remember about 300 years ago we used to have a kitchen before these people moved in." And so they all flew around and looked around underneath the hill, and they found the kitchen. Well, there were a few bowls there, and they were about this big. They weren't even big enough to crack an egg in. And she said, "Oh no, this will never do." She said, "You need to go home to my house, and you need to get the butter and the sugar and the chocolate." Said the king of the fairies. She said, "Yes, and the chocolate." And she said, "And I'll need some baking powder, and you need to bring me my biggest bowl, because I want to make you a huge cake." And so he says, "Off, everybody go off and bring in what she said to bring in." And so off they all flew, and they're flitting around. And Jack looked up from feeding the baby, and he said, "My gosh, look at all these fairies. She never told me the fairies come and visit her every day. I bet you she has a really good time while I'm gone, feeding this baby porridge." And so he's poking at the baby, and he's looking at stuff, and out fly all of the bowls, and the sugar, and the butter, and the chocolate, and everything. And he's thinking, well, I should probably do something about this. I'm being robbed blind. And then he thought, oh no, he says, I've got to get the, oh, nasty, stinky baby. So I guess I better check the other end. And so he does, and the fairies fly off with all of her stuff, and so she gets to mixing it all up, and she says, this is pretty good.